Let's begin this academic endeavor with a moment of silence. Okay, thank you. Once again, good afternoon, everyone, and a virtual welcome to Kristu Jayanti College, Bangalore, for the expert lecture on micro-narratives. The present scenario of COVID-19 pandemic has restricted our movements and confined us to our homes and limited areas or spaces. In a way, the lockdown period has paved a way for introspection and a surge of creative expressions like YouTube videos, short films, poems on COVID-19, exploring gardening, cooking, etc., etc. Yes, the vacuum we felt as a globe was filled with micro-narratives that celebrated differences and diversity within the limited spaces. We witnessed an outpouring of productions that connected human aspirations on virtual platforms. And today, we are eagerly waiting to explore further the micro-narratives, connecting it with our own experiences. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this academic discourse. First of all, I'm glad to welcome the members of the management team, our principal, Reverend Dr. Augustine George, our Dean, Dr. Gopakumar A.V., Dean of Department of Humanities. Though he is a journalist by profession, he is also an academic who is interested in literature. I welcome him to this academic discourse. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Kavita Shastri, Associate Professor, Head, Department of English and Media Studies, Vijaya College, Jayanagar, Bangalore, the speaker of the day. A warm welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now welcome Professor Jerin Jos, Coordinator, Department of English, UG. He is the person or the brain behind all the endeavors in the department. Welcome, Jerin, sir. Now may I welcome all the participants who have joined us. I'm sure your presence would make this discourse lively and a true learning experience. Welcome one and all. I also welcome my fellow coordinator, Jimin sir, and my colleagues from the Department of English UG to this expert lecture. I wish everyone a pleasant learning experience with Kavita ma'am. Now may I call upon Professor Akhila Varya, Faculty Department of English, Kristu Jayanti College, to introduce the speaker of the day. Over to you, Akhila ma'am.
Thanks, ma'am. A very good evening to all of you. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kavita Shastri for the expert lecture on Macrocosm to Microcosm, an exploration of micronarratives. Dr. Kavita Shastri is serving as Associate Professor and Head, Department of English and Media Studies, Vijaya College, Bangalore. She has many national and international publications to her credit and has also chaired sessions as resource person at several seminars, conferences, and workshops. She has guided students for MPhil and PhD programs. She is a budding poet and a translator. Several of her poems have been published in magazines and e-magazines. She is working on releasing her first anthology soon. We look forward to that, ma'am. A heartily welcome to the virtual meeting of like-minded people. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Akhila ma'am. Now we are eager to listen to you, Kavita ma'am. Yeah.
A very, very good morning to one and all. I suppose I am audible. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So let me start today's session. Okay. So a very, very good afternoon to one and all present today. Thank you, Christy Jayanti College, for inviting me to this virtual guest lecture. It's my pleasure and privilege to be a part of this lecture. In fact, I came to Christy Jayanti College a few years back to present a paper. And as I speak, I feel I have entered the portals of the college and I've entered the premises and I'm in one of the boardrooms or in the seminar hall making my presentation. So though it's virtual, imagination takes me to the center stage where things happened a few years back. So the very topic, macrocosm to microcosm, well, that's a journey in itself. The two words encompass the entire universe. Let me begin the word macrocosm. I can't proceed unless and until I go from the first slide to the second one. So let me begin with the word macrocosm. What's macrocosm? The world of complex structure. The whole world, I could say, or the universe. In fact, everything that exists. Another word for the cosmos. And juxtaposed is the word micro, small, macro, large. In fact, macro represents the vision of the cosmos. It's a feature which is present in many esoteric models of philosophy associated with Hermetism, astrology, alchemy, and even secret geometry. Man is the microcosm and the universe the macrocosm. All the answers we seek can be found in the macrocosmic view of the microcosmic view. Let me just repeat this line. All the answers that we are seeking are found in the macrocosmic view of the microcosmic you. You can see these two pictures here. I suppose you can't read what's written there because that's too small. These two pictures have no connection to any gender or race connotations. It means somewhere in this vast universe, there grows a boy. And somewhere in the boy grows the vast universe. The boy is just an example. So whatever answers we are seeking, it has to be either in this macrocosmic or this microcosmic you. This philosophy of macrocosm, atomicrocosm, was conceptualized by the great Pythagoras. Well, I have no intention to introduce any Pythagoras theorems, which we people from humanities and literature have left far away into the distant past. But I would like to suggest and tell you that this is a philosophy that was propounded by Pythagoras. Later on, a century later, it was re-articulated by Plato. Later on in the Renaissance by Leonardo da Vinci. What it means is by looking up, I see down. That's macrocosm to microcosm. By looking up, I see down. In fact, microcosm can be seen as a special kind of epitome. When you say micro, it does not make one feel small. It's very relative. I would say in your fingertip resides 10 million words in your fingertips. So I go from this vast universe to this vast universe, out to in. The journey from outside to inwards, outwards to inwards. Let me go on to the next slide. With what's a narrative? Now I've gone from macrocosm to microcosm. So narrative, the very word narrative is a word which puts a lot of questions in our mind because every other person uses the word narrative. Oh my God, everywhere. You're watching news, you're listening to something, you're watching a video, an audio clip, listening to an audio clip, you're watching a film or a movie, anywhere, everywhere, there is a narrative. And today is a world of not just singular monolithic narratives, but a world of multiple narratives. So let me understand what's narrative. As the slide very clearly says, a narrative is a story or a tale with series of related events, experiences, and it could be true, untrue. It could be a fictional piece. It could be a non-fictional. It could be a book. It could be a literary work. In fact, when I speak of narrative, I do speak of anything that's oral. Like we had folklore and legends and all that. That's also a narrative, and even today you have that. Okay, those unwritten, narratives which have reached us through the oral tradition. It could be audio clips, it could be video clips. Anything is a story. In fact, if you ask me, the master narrative teller or a storyteller is Somerset Maugham. So what exactly is this narration and narrative? It's just a technique. How do you look at the technique? How do you process it? How do how is a story narrated or told? That's what this whole gamut of narration comes across to us. So let's move on from multiple narratives. Politicians have narratives, organizations have narratives, brands have narratives, and there's so much of foreign intervention and intervention across the world when it comes to narrative. So should we boil down to one single narrative? That's going to be very risky. Or should we allow our thoughts to transcend all barriers to all levels and different levels and multiple levels of narration? Well, there are many questions there. I think I'm repeating the word narration and narrative many times. Well, it's obvious because that's what my topic delves on. If I go back and understand what narratology is, narratology is the science of narration, narrative structures. It's dedicated to the study of logic, of principles and practices of narrative representation. How do they really affect human perception? Because let me tell you, the way a narration reaches us is where our perception begins. There are so many narratives to a single story. Can have multiple narratives. One narrative can have multiple narratives, and a multiple narrative can end up with one narrative. Well, am I confusing you? Well, it is. Let's move on to the history of how narration began. The grand narrative. Let's go to the next slide, which speaks of the grand narrative. What's grand? Grand narrative, meta narrative. We can call it as master narrative. In fact, Jean Francis Lyotard was the person who gave us and coined this term grand narrative. Well, the very word creates its grandeur. Grand, meta, master, emancipatory narrative. That's what it was, this was a term which was introduced by Jean Francis Lyotard in his work, which was published in 1979. It was called as the postmodern condition. In this book, he sums up a range of views critiquing the institutional and ideological forms of knowledge. It could be, he picked upon Christian ideology, Freudian psychology, democracy, natural science, positivism to patriarchal order. Everything has come into the gambit of something which is grand, meta, master narrative. So as the very slide says, a grand narrative has an overarching structure which probably has a vision of the future. It's something like a more sophisticated version. It's slightly more sophisticated, and there is a vision and a mission statement. And that's flawed. Wherever you standardize a vision or a mission, that's where, it gives way to multiple narratives. That's where the narrative gives birth to many more narratives. So often this grand narrative tries to describe two things. One, is an ideal end state. Okay, this is what the ideal end should be. And what should be the path that we envisage to get to it? Well, there can't be one path. Of course, all roads lead to Rome. That's just a line. But here, there could be many, many narratives that can, create manifold perceptions. Unfortunately, both of these elements that we find, that is the ideal end state and the paths to reach it, both are flawed. Especially when we are working in complex environments today. If you observe, you're working in a very, very complex environment, it's impossible to understand that today. So by the time we reach the end state, the world would have really changed. So there is no one grand narrative that can be possible in the kind of a complex structural society that we live. So no plan survives. That's what it is. So what do we do? Should there be more narratives? Let's look at the next one. That's local narratives, which have particularly spun out of an overall narrative, and it depends on the issue and the context it operates in. How does it operate? What are the factors which lead to its operation? Given the kind of space and time that we are living in, what can be appropriate? Can we really appropriate anything? How do we situate a text is another question that keeps hammering us. So local narratives are best evolved with time. Let me just take any of the grand narratives and see how they have evolved. Adaptations have happened, retellings have happened. Like, for example, Ramayana per se is a grand narration with a grand ending, but here there are multiple Ramayanas, 100 Ramayanas, which created a stir across, to several retellings of it even now by people like Amish Tripathi, Devdutt Patnaik, Anand Neelakantan, Namrata Gokhale, Chitra Banerjee, in fact. So all these are, you can localize the narrative to suit the context and the time you are in. Now coming to the topic for my day, that is micro narratives. How do micro narratives work? So micro narratives come from people, anyone, you and I. We come with our own bits and pieces of story and we tell it to one another. These stories are how we tell them, how do we conduct ourselves? Are they shorthand comments? Do they really carry meaning? Are they explicit or implicit? Yes, both. Micro narratives can be short, precise, but still they could be loaded. Like, I'm reminded of Francis Bacon's aphoristic style, where he says, friendship is a sheltering tree, So there's so much of things packed into that statement or that line from Francis Bacon's essay. So something like micro narratives are aphoristic, packed. The question that comes to the focus is, are these narratives making any sense? Do they make any sense? What do they revolve around? Do they really understand the situation? Can they be analyzed? That's very important. Can they be researched? Can they be analyzed? Can we present them? Can they challenge us? How different are they from grand narratives? Something like a grand narrative has a top-down approach and a micro narrative has a bottoms-up approach. I don't know. Are they prescriptive? Do they describe an ideal world, or is there an ideal world? Or are there many perceptions and interpretations to this? Well, let me just go back. So the question that comes here is, are we able to map these micro stories and micro narratives? Is our narrative a micro narrative, a cluster of these grand narratives? That's a question. Or do we really adopt characterization and dialogue and plot and rhythm and theme? Do we go like what Aristotle tells us about with his poetic elements, or do we go like Burke, who learns from whom you learn to act in a scene or become an agent of a grand narrative? Or should we go back to the postmodern condition of Lyotard, who dismisses all grand narratives and and says you construct your own voice? Is there a voice in this dynamic network of local discourses is my question. Or should we go on and stick on to the sociological and historical framework given by Burke or Goffman? Should we go on to the psychological frame suggested by Goffman? when we understand micro narratives? Or should we go on exploring the embedded frames that stretch and accommodate within a narrative? Or without the dialectic? So should we move from the grand narrative, the universalizing, the essentializing, the totalizing, the marginalizing narrative? Should we leave the grand narrative back? Should we leave this influence of the totalizing, these essentializing, where there is only one end, when there is only one ideal state? Should we move from the tops down approach? Or should we move move from this marginalizing, totalizing, essentializing narratives to something which is juxtaposed, localized stories? Can we have a foothold? Will these micro narratives have a foothold? Is my question. Let me understand what is micro narration. Micro narration does not rely on one big idea, because there are many smaller ideas that can that can be an offshoot of any brand message. When I say brand, I involve even all these messages that are there, and your mailers and your advertisements, your entire body of advertising, which again is trying to shoot a small idea. Or does it rely on a big idea? Are there bigger ideas? Do we need a big idea to micro tell our short, smaller ideas? These are subtle questions that come to our mind. Let me just go on to micro narration. How is it done? How does it go on? So the micro storytelling approach leaves room for communication, because it allows you, because there is a wide range of subjects which are there. So it's like you are pursuing a rigid, inflexible emphasis. You're moving from that rigid domain to something, from rigid and radical to something which is flexible, which is not rigid, which is porous, and which does not stick on to one topic or theme, because it has a huge, very, very wide range. Let me just understand the idea of micro storytelling is not new. Let me tell you, this whole idea had its first impression in the cave paintings. If you check out the word cave paintings, were the perfect example of someone trying to communicate a complex storyline in a quick, easy to understand micro storytelling format. Like this is a cave painting belonging probably to the Neolithic or the Chalcolithic era. You have several such being etched across old civilizations, across in the proto-historic period, and they have a narrative. There is a narrative there. And can we go on from cave paintings? What else and what more? Where do we trace our history of micro narration? Then I would say it's this picture. It may be a frivolous one when you see it, when you have great painters across the world, and when you have Vatican, which is loaded. The entire Vatican City is a museum, is a live museum of these wonderful paintings from the times of Vinci to Rembrandt, to every little great painting. But it's not that. But what we see is a narrative here, and the narrative wants to communicate something. It's a flash communication that comes to us. So let's move on to the next one. This is amazing. Love tokens were a way for criminals to leave behind a memento. Now, this was way back in the year 1817. They were, all these people were given some kind of a brass or a kind of copper coins, and they were allowed to engrave something. Now, they are all on the verge of dying, so they would engrave something here, something that they felt, something that they wanted to convey. And these are engravings which had names, illustrations, and a message. You find so many of them. This is how it looks. You may not see it, but these are micro narratives, because it's etched here, July 1817. It tells the story of Elijah Swainson love tokens, which tells us about this guy called Elijah Swainson, who was a law writer. He was tried and convicted on 5th July 1870 for the assault and robbery of Thomas Taylor. It was believed he was 40 years old and at the time of conviction. So what is very shocking here is he and his two accomplices were sentenced to death. But what you see is before he sailed on board the Batavia in October 1817, he left these, tokens, these tokens. So look at the narration there. They're micro narratives because they narrate what probably, Elijah Swainson, a convict, wanted to say. Let me go further. So, how's the storytelling process? What happens in a storytelling process? Do we really engage the user? Is the user so very important? Because today what has happened is with digital narratives appearing and emerging everywhere, I have no choice but to say we no longer readers, we no longer listeners, we are users today. That adds a kind of a consumeristic perception to the whole thing. But I don't think I can stay away from saying that this whole storytelling process engages the user. How does the user get engaged? How does the storytelling process happen? So let's look at the micro narratives builds a kind of a relationship. And this is a relationship in which there is a participation. There is a kind of a proactive participation in this whole narration process. And it's not just at the physical level, but at the cognitive level that we find this micro narratives relating to us, addressing us, where there's not just a narrative, but a narrative. When we probably read Jane Austen's works or Charles Dickens' works, there is a narrator, where is the narrative? You were just somebody, there sitting miles away in another continent across a different time zone, reading it. But there, here, digital narratives have a narrator and a narratee and user, and that's at the cognitive level. So, how do micro narratives progress? In fact, they are based on the kind of narrativity that is there. How does this narration happen? How does this whole process, engage the audience, engage it? What are the designed objects? Is there one? Is there a narrative design? Is my question. So this relation with the audience is established, and there are so many fragments, and these fragments or narratives are connected to probably building a perception. So let me come back to this, that micro storytelling is a process which involves so many ideas revolving around a topic, revolving around a range of issues, revolving around several themes, and they are quite complex. And today, with the use of creative communication technologies, one can get connected to these complex narratives and find the new audiences. Let me tell you, there is an audience in Pakistan, in probably Bangladesh, probably there is somebody in Wuhan also, where there is a narrative and it is technology which is helping us to connect somebody in Mexico or Bolivia or probably in Amsterdam. You're just connecting to new audiences and thriving. So how do these micro narratives, link to us? How do they connect? Earlier it was the television commercials. You're connecting to people and connecting to their user experiences. So how does it happen? How does it appeal? Are they personal or a-personal? Do they connect, or do they connect from one-to-one interaction? Is it something like a product that we experience, like buying a soap or a shampoo, or something different from that? So these micro narratives are unique and so complex in a way, yet so simple, because they are personal. They appeal to a large group of customers. It's like a one-to-one relationship. But there are many relationships out there, which means there is a large group of people who are readers, users, or beneficiaries, you could call them, or users of the product, or as I said, narratees, and they are using these experiences, and these stories, micro stories, have an experience to convey. And this is not just there is a kind of a brand that is built across these narration. And how does this brand reach you? Not, it's a product actually which is packaged. It's a service which is packaged and delivered to you as an experience. How far does it reach? Does any kind of a marketing, is some marketing involved in this experience? So I need to search for my brand stories in on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. It could be a person to person conversation, it could be flash fiction. So social media has opened a kind of a world for micro narratives, far more easy to spread. Earlier, it was so very difficult to reach a publishing house. It's not easy to get a work published. But today, you have so many platforms where you can voice out you can have your voice. And I think no government can hush these voices because they have a global presence. And this is where it makes a difference. In fact, many of the narratives, if you see, they are left at an effect called Zeigarnik effect. Zeigarnik effect is where an activity is interrupted. You know, like you have a tweet and then there's a break and there's another retweet later. So there is this, you know, there's a chance for ready recall. It postulates that people can remember unfinished, uninterrupted tasks more than the complete ones because we are wired in such a way. You know, this was a philosophy given by a psychologist named, Zeigarnik. And that's why the effect is called a Zeigarnik effect, where you're left with an incompleteness. And that incompleteness makes you go back to this narrative and go back to this, to these, social media platforms to search for the completion. To search. So there is a micro, telling all the time. It's like a cliffhanger kind of anything, where the message is shortened and sent, and there's a lot to be filled. There are so many gaps that need to be filled in the process. So let me go with the next. So before that, I need to tell you something about the digital narratives. How do these digital narratives work? Okay, they allow people to share. Everybody gets a chance to share photographs or paintings, or it could be sound, it could be a tape on a desk or a movie which is stored, and each individual can use to tell a story or present an idea. So basically these digital storytelling or narratives allows new practices for people to tell their compelling and emotionally engaging formats. If you check your tweets, which I am going to present in a few moments from now. So if you look at these posts, they are very engaging, they're very compelling, they are very persuasive. They want to something you're unaware of because the grand narrative, the meta narrative, the master narrative marginalized the scope for these micro narratives. So you were not allowed, you were stuck. How can you reach out to these compelling narratives? What do these narratives tell you? They are web-based stories, they are interactive, they are hypertext, let me tell you. And they can be computer games as well. You know, you have a concept like ludology, which tells us like narratology. These games also try to tell you something, like for example, the death defying game, which was there, like Blue Whale. It was a narration which was told that what people could do when they are in a psychological state of trauma, they could create such games. So there is an entire school of research going on ludology about how these games and the gamification, which nearly I think 50% of the children are engaged to and intoxicated to. I think they have a narrative there, so they can also probably narrate something. So how do you define these different experiences which are recorded on digital cameras or voice recorders, or presented through Final Cut Express or video? It could be YouTube videos, which are not used in my presentation. So how does this, what was the ancient art of storytelling which I showed you about this, a man and a bull? So from there it has transcended and moved up. You can see the dynamic progression there of this process of storytelling, how these emotions and images and sound are interwoven, the digitized stills that you see. How does new media work? How has the approach to storytelling changed? How has it given way to unique perspectives is my question. So these are the, so many things that are combined to create an experience, to create a kind of an engaging and a very thought-provoking experience. I think I cannot miss out on Twitter. Twitter is one such, we can call it as the king of micro narration, because this is where a lot of things happen. We call it as Twitterature. Twitterature is literature on Twitter, is called Twitterature. And actually, in fact, there are many books and literary pieces which are available on Twitter. Can you believe this? At first, the site was attacked for the limited amount of characters it gave users to share their thoughts. Because earlier they would just give us 140 characters to share. Now, after just a few years before, it has now changed to 280 characters. Can you imagine how precise, forestic, minimalistic you can go when you have to convey your words? The words precise, concise have to be reworded. The words have to be reworded because concise is, I don't know what concising can happen on Twitter. You'll yourself see that. So there's a lot of sharing of thoughts that happen here. So Twitterature is the literal use of this micro blogging service of Twitter. It includes, as I said, all the genres. You have aphorisms, you have poetry, you have fiction, you have non-fiction, you have everything there on these, on this particular Twitter. Let me go further. Now, this is, I want to bring it to your notice. Look, this is the Twitter address. Okay. This is the Twitter address. I want you all to see this. It was in the year 2015, and this is the platform Twitter profile of Cotto2115 at XY2115, the Twitter project. Now look at this person. They are the authors, Laura, Chiara, Sylvia. These are the people, Alessandro Zotta. These are the people who were the authors, and the name of this Twitter fiction or Twitter literature was Watchmen of the Nine. If you observe this, this is a sci-fi adventure that tells the story of 5 heroes who are sent back from the future 2015 to the present 2015 in order to save the world of the future, in which nature is almost completely extinct and a few green areas represent this. Let me tell you, this particular tweet was 600 tweets which became a part of Twitterature or micro narrative. Let's go further. Look at this. This is called as Desert Friends Writer. This was produced by Trenton. This was the platform. There was Twitter. Here the platform was Instagram. And the profile was at desertfriendsinstagram.com. You can check this out. You can see this is a web series, Desert Friends, which was a part of micro narration that happened for more than 100 clips were there, each with a duration of 15 seconds. You can see 15 seconds into 100 is 1500 seconds were put up on this Instagram platform, which had a story, which was a part of Instagram literature or micro literature. Look at the story. The series tells us about the story of 3 Californian friends, Ruby, Emma, and James, who find themselves in another galaxy inhabited by alien creatures. They struggle to find their way home, and along the journey, they have the opportunity to know better each other and find out details about their personal lives, which allow them to succeed in their goal. Let me tell you, just listen to these. These are 100 clips of 10 seconds, 15 seconds each, and what a 15-second into 100, 1500 seconds, and there is a narration. Let me tell you, there is a narrative structure. If I have to quote Frog, I have to say that, this Russian folklorist, the way he delineates how a narration happens, you can find the structure there. So what are micro narratives? They are required to understand the situation. How do we strategically appropriate it? How do we analyze and research it? Is there a way to research it? Is my question. I have not been able to, post something, but let me tell you, there was a Twitter festival which was called as Twitter's Second Fiction Festival. Okay, and there were writers from around the world who participated in this, in which the challenge was 140 characters you have to use. Okay, only 140 tweets to tell a story. One such story was Love in the Alps. This was one of the prize winners. I want you all to look at this, Love in the Alps. I'll read a few tweets. I couldn't post it here. It says, David felt that the cow was waiting for him. Each time he went to the shed, it would come over to watch him. So this many characters every time. I'm reminded of our telegram days wherein, you had to be very precise if you have to send a telegram, because a full stop also counted. So Love in the Alps, this is a Twitter tweets, just 140 character tweet which won a prize. So it says, this is how it runs. There is some more which said, look at this tweet. The police came. They said they just wanted to have a chat at this point in their investigations. Am I a suspect? So if you watch out all of this, you can come to the conclusion that there is so many things that are narrated. How do these micro narratives function is my question to all of you. What is the strategy? Are there any interventions? So how do these interventions happen? Is there a direction? Is there a strategic narrative is my question. There was one more tweet before I start with flash fiction. There is one more tweet which says, Jean Barrow says in this tweet, I assume Claudia would want to know about your infidelity. Hence, I would be caring for her. This is one tweet. Next tweet. I consulted Twitter. All responses advised telling Claudia. One suggested forcing you to do so yourself. Excellent idea. So these micro narratives allow the narrative to also be a part, narrator also to be a part, the user, the one who is tweeting, retweeting, also giving an opinion about what your last tweet should be. That's the kind of intervention you find in micro narratives. Let me now proceed to flash fiction. From Twitter to flash fiction. What is flash fiction? This is gaining a lot of ground today, and it's offline and online both. Okay, these micro narratives have found their a kind of a validation on in the virtual space, but still there is the publishing of this literature, whether it's literature or whether it's flash fiction, you can see that happening. So what is flash fiction? Let's understand that it's a fictional work of extreme brevity that still offers character and plot development. It identifies varieties. Many of them are defined by word count, like a 6-word story, the 280 character story, the dribble, drabble, sudden fiction. We call it by many names, micro stories. Let's look at this. Why did creative writers embrace this? Because this was a way to hone their skills. Had to be very efficient with the narrative, the structure, and the language. I have to give you an example of this. I have chapter 5 of Ernest Hemingway, which was one of the best quoted flash fiction. Then I have Franz Kafka's Give It Up. I have Styx George Saunders, which was amazingly done. So I will just go on to the next slide. You can look into these flash fiction and see amazing aphorisms, amazing, hand-picked words put into a kind of a format which creates its own structure. Let's look at this. So let's look at this. Oh no, the other one. Okay, for sale baby shoes never worn. This is all that was there. For sale baby shoes never worn. That's all. This was one of the greatest of all flash fiction. Just 6 words. And if it was indeed a story, it was Ernest Hemingway, the one who wrote Old Man in the Sea. And this created a kind of, precedent for flash fiction. It was straightforward, it was descriptive, it was out of the scene. How do we look at the parameters of understanding this? Can we really understand this? Can we find a meaning? Is there a meaning or is there none? Can we draw a structure there? These are many questions that come up to my mind as I try to understand this. Let's look at this. If you can read it, once upon a time, there's a legend about a lighthouse. You can read this. Once upon a time, there was a legend about a lighthouse that turned into a ship and sailed all the seas of the world. When trying to return, was shattered on the rocks of its childhood. Actually, you can't imagine anything more terrifying than what happened to poet X, who woke up one morning and discovered that he was poet one. Now, you look at this flash fiction, micro narrative, because time is a constraint today, and people are just reading this and understanding this and trying to rational and be a participant. I think that's very important because you are practically in a participatory role when you are reading these digital narratives. So let me just look at it. What do we notice here? Is there a narrative structure? Is there a power and cultural power relations that you can draw in these narrations? What Todoro, and can we see, can there be a structuralist narratology structure, structuralist narratology that is illustrated here? What about the language and the parole? Can we see that? Can we explore the elements of narration here in these flash fiction? Let's go to the next one. Oh God, there is a problem with the internet. So yeah, so this is another flash fiction. Please read this. It's called as Trash by Candace A. Williams. George was sick of Amy's nagging. For a month, she had, I can't see that. So you can read this. She had after him to clean out the basement, even without holding a rendezvous. I'm fed up with this junk. Why don't you throw away everything? You are using a perfectly good living space. I want the basement back. Okay, this goes on further with the, grudgingly George placed his precious possessions out from outside, pick up from the next day. I can't see a part of it. I don't know why. So it would cost you more to have hauled it, was the worth. Around 7 p.m., Amy was screeching again. George, there is a homeless man on a property. Hurry up, call up the police officer. He's stealing our things. This is a story, a flash fiction called Trash. Can we see characterization? How do we elicit the meaning out of these individual stories? Can we analyze the frames and interpret these micro stories? Can we use the narrative data analysis method? Can we evaluate the speaker and or the author who is providing us this information? As I just now told you a few minutes back about Vladimir Prop, a folklore researcher, he does agree that these stories are character driven. Now you have a character like Amy and George. Is the storyline driven by the decisions and actions of these characters? Can they be broken down to smaller narratives? Can they be broken down to narrative units, narration of George and narration of Amy? The Morphology of the Folklore in 1928 by Vladimir Prop will probably help us to delineate and to go into analyze these micro stories. Look at this Polo Arts by Mark Tulin. Polo wanted to paint like Mark Chagall. This is beautiful. You have to read it. The sense of humor here. Polo wanted to paint like Mark Chagall, but the more he tried, the more his art resembled Edward Munch. It terrified Paulo as well as mother, who wondered why such a good son would paint such frightening work. What did you do to that canvas? The mother asked in horror. Paulo told his mother that art could not be explained in words. It was a feeling, an intuition, a conception, undefinable. That painting looks like a man who is insane, said his mother. Paulo was too afraid to tell his mother that it was a self-portrait. Okay, so now can there be a narration? Can we follow the 7 elements of narration here? The character, the plot, the style, the setting, the literary devices used. You know, can we really go into the depth of it? Can we analyze the space of flash fiction? Can we apply any of the narratology methods here? Because Todorov speaks of narratology in the sense that there is a kind of uh, pattern in the narratology which begins with a happy start, like equilibrium. The son is happily doing the canvas and the mother is watching him. Then there is a disruption when she says, "What have you done to the canvas?" There is a recognition. The boy says, "Yes, I know what I have done to the." There is no repair here, but there is an equilibrium which says, "Yeah, yeah, I have painted. Looks like a man who's insane." No, no, it's a self-portrait. So there is this disruption, and is there, can we use the story as an object of our study? Is my question to you all. So this is another story which was very, very famous by Franz Kafka's "Give It Up, Give It Up." Very nice story about how very early in the morning, it was an early morning and the streets were clean and deserted. I was walking to the station. As I compared that tower clock with my watch, I realized that was already much later than I had thought. I had to hurry. The shock of this discovery made me unsure of the way. I did not yet know my way very well in this town. Luckily, a policeman was nearby. I ran up to him and breathlessly asked him the way. He smiled and said, "From me, you want to know the way?" "Yes," I said, "since I cannot find it myself." "Give it up, give it up," he said, and turned away with a sudden jerk, like people who want to be alone with their laughter. Now, this, we all know Kafka, but Kafka as a micro narration of Kafka, a micro narrative of his, which speaks in volumes about the power of these micro narratives, what these micro narratives can do, and how powerful can they be because they're giving a voice to everyone. I have just put on the voices of a lay person when I shared the tweets with you. I was just giving a voice to this flash fiction by anybody, everybody who's has an ID. So has it given us a voice? Is my question, which keeps coming again and again. Look at this. This was a beautiful one. The therapy seemed to be working until I realized I was the patient, not the doctor. It turned worse when I figured out I was just the chair. My father came to live with me. It was my turn to say, "My house, my rules." Just a little. There is a patient, there is a therapy going on, there is a doctor, I presume, there is a chair, or I don't know. You have to analyze the setting. There is a setting where, there is a chair, very, very clearly you have a prop there. Okay, and there is a house, and I wonder if there is a therapy that's happening. What I'm trying to do is micro narratives opens a complete bit of research opportunities that one can do. So can we engage in inquiry is my question. Can we examine the breakdown of the plot? Can we examine the sequence of the events? Can we recognize the author's style? Can we understand the author's or the narrative's POV point of view? How do we do this? Can there be stories smaller than this? Look at this last slide. Riveting 10-word stories. Can there be any bigger, better opportunity for micro narratives in the digital space that we are living? Or should we think that small is bad? Or should we come to the conclusion that, it can't be so? Can we have a universe right here in these vast stories? Because there is a story everyone wants to tell. Will we allow these stories to exist and live? Will these stories wait? Will these stories find a space in the virtual walls? Is my question. Look at these 10-word stories. Before I said goodbye, and I really meant it this time. You tend to go back to who feels like home. It's easier to love myself when you love me too. They are not quotations. There is a story there. I never needed drugs. There's so much to say after this and before this. You set me on fire and apologized for burning. Is there a story? Do these flash fiction have a story? Is there something to be communicated? Or is there nothing? Are these micro narratives going to stay with us? Or will there be an end to them? Then before I end, my last line would be, the micro world has to love the micro world because it's life, because it's here that life depends on. So the life depends on these micro narratives. If you want to have the spectacle of life, if literature is life, if literature is a mirror to the society, then literature has to be micro narratives. We have to move from the totalizing, conceptualizing, marginalized narratives to the world of micro narratives. So from macrocosm, I think it's time to move to the microcosm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that wonderful session. So now the floor is open for questions. Anybody who want to ask a question can unmute and ask, or you can share your question in the chat box. In the meanwhile, there is a link given in the chat box. You can give a feedback to us, and based on that feedback, you'll be getting a certificate within maybe 2 or 3 days. The floor is open for discussion now. So there is a question from Puneet, and Puneet is asking, will the novels which are so detailed have micro narratives? So elements of novel or a short story, can we consider that as a micro narrative?
Well, a novel cannot be considered as a micro narrative if because there is a word restriction here with micro narratives. You have to stick on to that 150 to 80 character barrier. Here, the time is not the barrier, the space is not the barrier, the word limit is the barrier when it comes to micro narratives. So you have to be, concise and precise to say the entire David Copperfield or tested deliverables can be narrated. You can have Shakespearean sonnets being said so in micro narration, but it's time for people to explore the world of micro narratives and to make it available because time is a constraint and space is not a constraint because the virtual space allows n number of narratives to be posted.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. In micro narrative, anything and everything is considered a narrative. Can absence or silence can be a narrative?
Why not?
Absence.
Absolutely. There's so many silent voices that itself is a narrative. In fact, when you put a full stop, if you've observed some of the flash fiction that I posted, there are multiple full stops. The full stop is a pause, and that pause has a lot of meaning. You have to search in between, not the words, in between the letters. That's where silence has a point. These micro narratives allow silence. It actually gives a voice to the silence. That's what I feel. There is a lot of scope for micro narratives because anyone and everyone, can come out of their closets and speak because there is a space for everyone and anyone. Gender, caste, color, creed, all barriers can be transcended here on in micro narratives because there's something which is said and something which is unsaid. Like what Keith said, heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. So maybe those unheard narratives of silence will make more sense and will be heard louder.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So I was reminded of like an activity which I was doing, like when you were talking about Twitter post. I usually post no WhatsApp status. Sometimes I post, but words are very limited. You need to reframe, restructure, and we need to make sure that whatever sense we are trying to convey is conveyed through that limited words, maybe 140 words, very limited. But the satisfaction that you are getting and people when they start commenting about it, see, there is something big about micro. So that is what I feel. I
Absolutely.
just
Very
to
true. Very
add to
true.
your point.
Yes, absolutely. It's just a replacement of one letter, I and A, but that makes a difference. But I and the A, both vowels, but still there is a difference, a world of difference that these two letters make.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. And there is a question from Heidi Thomas, and she's asking, in the realm of micro narratives, what role does false or fake narratives play?
Yes, there is a scope for fake narratives. You can call, let me tell you, all fictional narratives are fake only. And even if it's fake, there is always a scope for all fake narratives also. Very true, because sometimes these stories may not be existing and they may be finding their voices and they may be finding a lot of takers also because it's a world of, where we are diabolical in our stance and we are double-edged swords and we have two faces, so there can be fake narratives also. It's up to us to take what we want and leave what we want. It's ultimately the reader or the user who would decide whether it's a fake narrative or a real narrative, but there is scope for all kinds of narratives. You can fictionalize it and call it, okay, that's fictionalized or non-fictionalized, but whatever it is, there is a scope. Yes, opportunity for voices and not real voices, fake
Yeah.
voices.
To
Yes, that
add
is
to
there.
that, at the time of in an era where post-truth determines everything, we cannot say how conveniently or convincingly we are saying something that is becoming more important than truth or not truth.
Absolutely. Very true, very
Yes.
true. What you say is not important. How you say is very important.
Yes. So this is from Dr. Beena S. Nair, and she's asking, micro narratives mimic the popular forms of poetry as haiku or tanka. Could you
Absolutely.
comment
Absolutely.
on this
Oh,
return to
absolutely.
haiku from the micro
Yes, yes. Haiku is nothing but a kind of, I have not touched on the genre of poetry, but you have code poetry, you have visual poetry, you have pattern poetry. Haiku is again another. All of them give scope in different forms, and they move from the grand narrative style to a kind of go with the popular culture. So yes, it's a part of popular literature, and we can say that it is a micro narration if in case I include poetry also into the gambit that I am speaking of. Yes, yes, true.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. This is from Sunita. She's asking whether you can suggest any theoretical books which deals with micro narratives other than Leotard.
Leotard is there, then you have to, if you are studying narratology, you have to study books of Todorov. You have to take up Vladimir Frog's book before you actually analyze any of these structures, narrative structures. If you want to work on narratology or narrative structures of these micro narratives, are not actually, you get books on literature which is available, but they're not very famous writers. Of course, the people who are on Twitter will know them more than people who are more associated with other forms of literature. But yes, it's all available in the virtual space. The tweets are available. They have been bound and published as literature, and you have a lot of digital narratives which are available. They may not be famous names. You can download, and you can download them from the net, and you can copy and use them. So a lot of research can be done using all these theoreticians, and plus you can use your psychoanalytical theory, the Freudian theory. You can use your theological studies, empirical studies can be done. In fact, you can do a esoteric study of these narratives, these microfiction also. So there is a whole world opening for you, for all of us.
Hmm. Thank you, ma'am. This is from Dr. Rukmani, and she's asking, how do you look at the mythological stories coincided in couplets like Eka, Sloki, Gita, Namaste, Ramayana, etc.?
Absolutely wonderful. They are short, they are micro narratives. Even the Panchatantra is a micro narrative that way. And there's so many stories that were told even in our Jataka tales or stories. If you see, even the Bible is interspersed with a lot of such stories. They are all micro narratives to build the philosophical tenets that was intended to. In fact, the pill was the philosophy there, but what was given was a micro narration there. There were micro narratives which were interspersed everywhere in folklore, legends, fables, your entire Jataka tales, your entire Panchatantra, and your entire in fact, your Puranas are all interspersed with loads of stories. You have all the stories of all the festivals we celebrate. That's all interspersed in the Puranas. So if you pick up anything, these micro narratives keep appearing here and there. Only thing is they remained lost. There are multiple narratives in the grand narrative. So I think they can find a space. Like you have Shurpanka's story there. You have the story of, Ahalya. Those stories remain there embedded in the grand narrative. What is important is these narratives have been retold by many like Devdutt Patnaik and Amish Tripathi and all of them like Chitra Banerjee and all. But what I meant to say is these micro narratives have their own existence. Existentialism is not an issue here anymore, because these micro narratives are finding their own space and their own existence, independent of the macro narratives, independent of these grand narratives.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I think that's all about the questions I can see in the chat box. Yes.
Thank you
So,
so much.
yeah,
I would
thank you
like
for this.
to
Yeah.
thank Dr. Lily Kuti, Akhila, and Eugenin, and the principal. I want to offer my salutation to the college principal, the entire management of Prastu Jayanti College, and all of you who are there with me at this unguarded hour of 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, when people are a little sleepy. But if you have been alert and you've been listening to me, I'm blessed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
So much, ma'am.
Let me
Thank you so
remind
much.
just a second, Lily, ma'am. let me remind the participants to fill the feedback form. Based on your feedback form, a certificate will be given to you for participating in this event. Over to you, Lily ma'am.
Yes, only to those who submit the feedback form, the certificate will be provided, because we don't have the registration form. So only those who have filled the feedback form will be receiving the certificates. So kindly, please, please fill the feedback form. I'm posting it again. So please fill it if you haven't. So thank you once again. I don't know how to thank you. It was really a wonderful session. Hope we get more chances to express these micro narratives that we are holding within, and the unspoken words, the experiences that we have. Thank you. It was wonderful. Now
Thank you.
may I call upon Professor Jerin Jos, Coordinator, Department of English UG, to propose the official vote of thanks. Over to you, Jerin, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes, sir. Sorry. Yes, sir.
So I hope all of you had a very wonderful session listening to Dr. Kavita Shastri for the last 1 hour. It was a very useful session, and even though we use it, we may not be very familiar with whatever things that we do, but she is making it very clear with the way she has explained all the things in a very organized manner. First of all, I would extend our gratitude on behalf of the Sujayanti family and the Department of English. I wish to thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for
Thank you so much.
accepting our invitation and delivering a lecture to us. And now I would like to thank Reverend Dr. Agustin George, our principal, who is always very encouraging, and he always motivates us to conduct more events, and that is why we are able to conduct.
I think Jarin sir is facing some network issues.
Am I not audible, ma'am?
Yeah, now you're audible. Yes.
I'm sorry. So I wish to thank our principal, who is always very supportive, and also we have various other fathers in our institution. I wish to thank all the fathers who are always very supportive. And I should not miss out our dean, Dr. Gopakumar Devi, who is always very eager to help us in organizing any events. And he was always there from the beginning to ask about how it is going to be and whether everything is ready. And so I wish to thank him. And finally, it is the participants. So it was a short notice, and even then we had a more number of participants. I wish to thank all the participants for spending time and joining with us for this lecture. Also, the coordinators for this event today, Dr. Lilliputti Abraham, Professor Jibin S. Matthew, and Professor Agila Warrior. So I wish to thank them for wonderfully organizing this program. I wish to thank our tech team who was always there to help us with this. And in between, we never faced any issues, and they were always there. And from the beginning, even now, they are there as part of our program here. I wish to thank them. And finally, all the faculty members from our department who are always very supportive and helping. Thank you, all the teachers. And once again, I thank all of you. Over to you, Lily ma'am.
Thank you, Jarin sir, for being a big support. So let's call it a day. Thank you for this wonderful experience. Once again, thank you, ma'am, and thank you all the participants. Okay, we will be connecting with you, and thank you. Bye. Let's end the meeting.